Peter Feinberg came through transplant and graft versus host disease and shares what it took to regain his physically active life after treatment.
I'm Peter Feinberg. I was diagnosed with B-cell ALL in December of 2020. I was a full-time practicing corporate law attorney living with my wife in San Francisco, California. I led an active life that, in addition to my law practice, included outdoor activities like swimming and hiking, time spent with friends and volunteering. About a year and a half before my diagnosis, I had had a very bad body surfing injury in which I broke my neck, broke all my ribs on my left side, punctured a lung, dislocated a shoulder. And as part of that, I had some blood panels done that showed that I had very low red blood cells and very low platelets. My doctor at that point in time believed that that was solely the result of an accident and my body being thrown off. I ran a couple of times a week, 7 miles a shot, was running sub 7-minute miles, and I started noticing that my times got significantly worse. They went from under 7 to over 9, and I felt far more tired at the end of it. I knew something was out of whack. I basically said to my primary care physician, I'm not going to leave your office until we get to the bottom of this. My thought when all of this was going on was that I probably had some sort of a moderate anemia, which was going to be treated by going in as an outpatient and getting a shot of B12 or something similar a few times a year. So there's a test called cytogenesis that they did, or cytogenetics, which showed that I had a 90% likelihood of either leukemia or lymphoma. That led to something called a bone marrow biopsy. And the bone marrow biopsy showed that not only did I have leukemia, but that it was an acute leukemia, ALL. It was B-cell, Philadelphia chromosome negative, and a very worried hematologist, oncologist who I had never met, calling me on the phone, telling me I needed to be in the hospital within 36 hours to start a chemotherapy treatment for ALL called CVAD. I think I went into it with a combination of adrenaline, arrogance, and obliviousness that kind of made me feel like that it wasn't as serious as it really was. I knew that the disease had taken my mom and her mom. There hadn't been a lot of conversation about what they went through. I think that there was a lot of hardcore denial going on in my mind. The most typical starting treatment for ALL patients is something called CVAD. It comes in 2 different rounds, and I physically sailed through the first round. I was told by my nurse that when I got out of the hospital, I put on my little puffer jacket and had my wheelie bag. I looked more like someone arriving at SFO than I did somebody coming out of chemotherapy, and that all of the people who had gone in the week before me were still suffering while I got out, which I think, was good luck based on having been in good shape going in. They give you a week off in between the first and the second round, and the second round was just absolutely terrible on me. What typically happens in CVAD is that after they complete those 2 rounds, they do another bone marrow biopsy to see if the leukemia is out of your system or if it's going down or what the basic status of it is. Well, unfortunately, they found out that the cancer had gone from 15% to 50%, at which point they classified my leukemia as being severely refractory. There is a relatively newly discovered and approved monoclonal antibody. The short name for it is Blincyto, that worked absolutely wonderfully for me. In the past, they would have just kept giving me the chemo that had not worked very well and hoped that somehow or another my body would have improved with it. But in all likelihood, I probably would have died. But with this monoclonal antibody, it's a 28-day course, the first 11 days of which are in the hospital. And the induction was very, very hard on me, probably because my body was fighting the antibody so hard at that stage. But once I got used to it after about the 5th day, it was very, very easy. The expectations management was one of the most difficult things in all of this. As I said, I went into this with a great degree of confidence. When I got back that bone marrow biopsy that showed that my cancer had not reduced, but had significantly increased, that was the first time that I really thought, I'm probably going to die of this. And that was a very overwhelming thing for me. My doctors really believed I was going to get a good outcome from the CVAC. Conversely, when I started on the Blincyto, while the doctors were optimistic about the Blincyto, the thought was, well, he's probably going to need at least 2 cycles of Blincyto. And after 1 cycle, they did another bone marrow biopsy, and there was no detectable cancer in my body. And that was the best day of my life. I had met several people through the course of going through this who had gotten to full remission and then immediately had the cancer come back. And in a couple of instances, they had not subsequently been able to get back to remission. So I was really freaked out about the possibility that I might lose this remission and lose my way into a stem cell transplant, because the likelihood of transplant working is far, far better if you go into it with no detectable cancer in your body. So I went into Stanford on March 31st of 2021. They give you 1 day off to get acclimated, and then they start intense chemotherapy, 3 days of busulfan and 3 days of Cytoxan, then a day off, and then the stem cell transplant. While I had heard about the risks of transplant and the side effects of transplant, what I had not realized was that almost none of those risks relate to the transplant itself, but instead they relate to those 6 days of chemotherapy, the Cytoxan and the busulfan. And when I was about to get the Cytoxan, I said, oh, no problem with the Cytoxan. I had no side effects whatsoever in CVAT. And they said, well, that's great, except the dose this time is going to be 6x what the dose was in CVATs. That is every bit as hard as you would imagine it is. I felt very good going into transplant, and I continued to feel very well for 3 or 4 days afterwards, so much so that I continued to ask my nurses if they were in fact pranking me about these horrible things that I was going to start to feel. But I found out pretty quickly that they were, if anything, underestimating. The absolute gold standard for donors in terms of GVH, they want somebody whose makeup is as close to yours as possible. And if it is an identical twin, perfect. If it's a fraternal twin, really good. If it's not, if it can be a family member, like parent, a child, or a sibling, that is the next best thing. And I hit a home run there because I have 1 sibling and she was a match. So I think that the fact that I had her stem cells lessened the GVH that I've had. My doctors explained that they actually like a little bit of GVH because it is, a sign that your body is accepting the cells. It's one of those things that a little bit is good, big bit of it is terrible, potentially even deadly. I was discharged 16 days after transplant, which was relatively quick. And I had about 10 days to 2 weeks at home. And then the remainder of the 100 days, which is sort of the period that they look at the most closely after transplant, was actually, other than the skin GVH, really, really good. I mean, I was back to driving within about a month. I was doing chores around my house. I was jumping rope. I was taking vigorous walks. My first year was really, really good. I view the treatment and recovery process as being like a 3-legged stool. There's your medical team, there's your friends and family, and there's the community. And the role of the community is your friends and family and your medical team really don't know what you're going through. We all have different needs. I'm going to speak to my 4 billion male brothers on the planet on this. I feel that we are significantly below your 4 billion female sisters on the planet, that men are not nearly as good at reaching out on these sorts of things as women are. My chat group is about 90% women, and they are the loveliest people who I view as every bit as much of my family as my sister, my friends, or anyone else. Talk to other people who have been through this. I don't know how I could have gotten through it without those people, so bless them, really. I have so much love for everybody in the community. I can't say to anybody, you're going to get through this, but I'm going to say, think about what you really need, because there are resources to help you as you go through this process. And BMT InfoNet is a wonderful one of those resources. And I hope that the people who are listening to this are taking full advantage of what they have out there for them.
For more information, to sign up for our newsletter, and to connect with us on social media, visit bmtinfonet.org.